KK's Priest will release their new studio album, Sinner Rides Again, in just a few days.
Can you believe that?
So let's take a look at what is inside KK Downin's sophomore record with his new band, and then answer the question which seems to bother many. How does it compare to modern Judas Priest? Here you go. From the opening notes of Sons of the Sentinel, it becomes clear that on Sinner Rides Again, KK Downing will not be reinventing the wheel. In fact, quite the opposite. This record will be a natural continuation of his debut album, opening with yet another epic guitar intro and bursting in energy with the main riff.
Nice!
Overall, Sons of the Sentinel might be the most definitive track of this record as a whole. It has that classic yet very aggressive heavy metal spirit. Skull-crushing fast riffs and high-pitched screams KK and Ripper are of course very well known for.
Tim Ripper Owens is my name, so you get that too.
It's classical lyrical breakdown, which I'll be honest with you, I'm usually not really fond of in most of the songs, but it does not feel overstretched at all, and I can already see it as a great concert opener for the upcoming tour. Although it might have to compete for that spot with its counterpart from the first record. Strike of the Viper on one hand continues the tone set by its predecessor, yet at the same time introduces a slightly darker sound, possibly much more so than anything we've heard by this band so far. Overall, this track gives out this Ripper-era Judas Priest feel, although with a much tighter and more modern production, and in my opinion could have fit quite well on Tim's Judas Priest debut Juggalator, which, in case you're wondering, is definitely a compliment. By the way, talking about Juggalator and Demolition, if the boys decide to not fully concentrate on their original material on the upcoming tour, I personally would love it if KK's Priest played more songs from those two records instead of the classic Priest tunes. As first of all, this would be the fans' only chance to hear those live, and by the end of the day, it is Tim's voice they were all written for. Reap the Whirlwind, which was released as one of the singles to this record, just like the previous track by the way, and just like the track after that. What is that with the trend of releasing singles of the tracks which go one after another on the record lately? I wonder if it is done on purpose to make you feel more familiar with the record upon your first listen. Does anyone actually know? Because if you do, please let us know in the comments. I've been kind of wondering about that for a while now.
Write that down, write that down!
But anyways, it is possibly the most straight out of the heavy metal guidebook, in-your-face classic heavy metal song. And this is exactly what I absolutely love about it. This is one of those songs which is not overly pretentious and showcases what KK Downing knows how to do best, which for me personally makes it one of the strongest tracks on this record. As by the end of the day, it is this classic and straightforward heavy metal what you come to KK's Priest for. One more shot at glory on one hand continues its footsteps, yet at the same time introduces a slightly more complicated musical structure with several tempo changes and of course an exquisite vocal performance by Tim Ripper Owens. And here I kind of have to address one issue. You know, this album features at least 3 tracks which in one way or another reference early Judas Priest work. And here I have to be honest with you, I don't actually think it was necessary, and not because KK Downing does not have a right to reference the early songs, of course he does, but overall I just never really was a fan of such references in metal in general. You know, I love how Charlotte the Harlot kind of randomly appears in a couple of Iron Maiden songs, and how in the Judas Priest lore Exciter becomes a Painkiller and then Angel of Retribution, which by the way I've been meaning to release an episode about for quite some time and I hope to do so soon. But the truth is that such songs as Sinner, The Sentinel, and Painkiller, or any other of the classic Judas Priest and any other band songs are the tracks which and I'm sure most of the classic heavy metal fans have been listening to for pretty much their entire lives. And of course I know by heart every little aspect and bit of it performed either in the studio or in some legendary live shows. So whenever I personally see such references, they create an unnecessary connection with those legendary tunes in my head, which sometimes, in my opinion, can stop some listeners from enjoying the greatest of the new tunes. And this of course goes not only for Sinner or The Sentinel. I actually think about it in exactly the same way about Metallica's Unforgiven. And while I absolutely love Unforgiven 2 and Unforgiven 3, I actually sometimes think that if they would have been named differently, I would actually most likely like them even more so than I do.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
But anyways, I actually think now that it's kind of weird that I'm bringing this up here, because in case of One Shot at Glory, it actually does not bother me at all, because it does not actually reference the legendary Judas Priest song, but instead tells the story of where KK Downing and Tim Owens are at today, alluding on the famous 1991 track. And in all fairness, well, come on, it is a kick-ass song. Hymn 66 introduces a much darker side of KK's Priest music. It is much slower than most of the other tracks, and at the same time is possibly one of the heaviest tracks on the record, with several rather unexpected modulations which actually help introduce a slightly unexpected tone for this track. And although I don't really think that the band will play this song quite oftenly on their live shows, it definitely is placed at exactly the right place on this tracklist, as it allows the listener to breathe and reflect after a heavy and speedy One More Shot at Glory, opening the gates to the second half of this album.
Exactly.
But anyways, thus ends the first side of Sinner Rides Again, which I'm still bound to enjoy only digitally, but I do hope that I'll receive my vinyl record very, very soon. And so here, I guess, would be a great time to make the first conclusions about this album. So let's do it. Many people consider Sinner Rides Again to be a twin brother of Sermons of the Sinner, an opinion which I personally do not 100% agree with. Yes, Sinner Rides Again is actually made with exactly the same formula and by exactly the same rules, if you will, as the Sermons of the Sinner. Yet it does not follow the debut album's footsteps step by step. In fact, the two main differences between this record and the first album are, first of all, the interaction between the two guitarists, KK Downing and AJ Mills, who it feels like feel much more comfortable playing with each other right now, and this actually results in them sounding much more coherent than before. And secondly, the whole fact that Tim Owens now seems to be much more comfortable in utilizing the different sides of his voice and experimenting with his register much more so than he did before. Which altogether makes me believe that Sinner Rides Again is not really a twin brother of Sermons of the Sinner, but rather is a perfected version of it, in which the band members who at first did not really know what the future will hold for them now do understand and see where this is going and feel much more comfortable with each other, forming this coherent unit, which for me personally makes this a much stronger record than the band's debut.
The wind, you will reap the whirlwind.
By the way, guys, since we're taking a little break here, I just wanted to point out that only around 30% of the people who are watching my videos are actually subscribed to the Metal Pilgrim channel. So if for some reason you still haven't done so yet, and especially if this is not the first video you're watching on this channel, please consider doing that right now.
We're gonna have a good time. Always.
And as always, I just wanted to thank you guys all for the amazing support you're showing to me, this show, and Ukraine through this very, very difficult time. Just know that your support means the world to me and all Ukrainian metalheads. The opening track of the second half of the record finally introduces the title song for this album, allowing us to witness how the sinner, whose sermons we heard a couple of years ago, finally rides again.
Nice.
And by the way, the whole fact that the title track of this album is introduced only on the second half of the record is, in my opinion, very significant to the whole structure of the track list and evaluating the strength of Sinner Rides Again as a whole. You see, running a little bit ahead of myself, I actually have to point out that the second half of the album is actually quite different to the first one, yet at the same time might actually be even more memorable than the first one. By the way, the whole opening part of the Sinner Rides Again actually does give out a slight Judas Rising vibe to me personally, which in turn is one of my favorite songs by Judas Priest, simply because of that very strong emotional connection I have with it. Rides Again has in fact a very strong and catchy chorus, which I'm sure will be a great sing-along on all future KK Priest concerts, and together with its melodic lyrical breakdown pretty much becomes a quintessential 80s heavy metal epic, which after that transitions into Keeper of the Graves, a song which continues the overall mood created by its predecessor, yet at the same time evokes this much more haunting feeling.
I love it.
In addition, Keeper of the Graves actually features some of the best guitar work on this album, and what I love about it the most is that the interaction between KK Downing and AJ Mills does not necessarily mimic what KK did with Glenn Tipton, allowing AJ Mills to showcase his abilities and his style of playing, which I personally absolutely love.
Yeah, me too.
And by the way, the interview with the AJ Mills will also be posted on MP2 in a couple of days, so make sure to check it out.
Strike of the Viper is a 2.5 minutes brutal assault of heavy metal. In fact, it's a lesson in heavy metal in 2.5 minutes.
On Play to Your Souls, KK Priest do a rather interesting trick by decreasing the BPM, yet at the same time cranking that epicness to 11.
These go to 11.
It feels like this song was written specifically to be played live. It is just a perfect fit for both small clubs and huge arenas, and with its steady rhythm and simple yet very catchy vocal melodies, will definitely be a great song to headbang and sing along to for all die-hard fans. Yet another thing which is really good at is actually setting the mood for the album outro. Wash Away Your Sins is in a way a unique track on The Sinner Rides Again. On one hand, it is not really similar to any other on this record, yet at the same time it does embrace everything this album is about. In a way, it kind of evokes similar feelings to Cathedral Spires on Jugulator, and while it is still the longest track on this album, it does not feel overstretched at all. Wait, quite the opposite. It actually takes you on a journey through your inner self, and at the same time evokes this feeling of longing to prolong this heavy metal saga. So what about Sinner Rides Again? Is it a good heavy metal album, and is it worth your attention? Well, definitely yes. But how does it compare to modern Judas Priest? Well, this is the best part. It does not. And it actually should not. Everyone knows that I'm a huge Judas Priest fan, always have been and always will be. And yes, that does also imply that I'm a fan of KK Downing and Tim Ripper Owens, because both of those guys were an essential part of the history of one of the greatest heavy metal bands on this planet.
Yes, it's true.
But I believe that if your level of appreciation of new music by ex-members of a band reduces to the level of simply comparing the two entities, well, there is clearly something wrong with it. So to all those who scream that this is more Judas Priest than Judas Priest, no! This does not sound like Judas Priest. Well, it sounds part Judas Priest, of course, because it has a part of the DNA of that band, yet it actually undeniably sounds like KK's Priest. And this is what I absolutely love about this album. On his sophomore record with KK's Priest, KK Downing did not simply allow, but also seemed to encourage more creative input from other band members. And this, in my opinion, has only enriched its sound compared to the debut record. In fact, together with the input by AJ Mills and Tim Ripper Owens, KK's Priest was already able to develop its own trademark sound. Yes, built on the guidebook and the foundations of this very classic heavy metal, but this is of course very understandable, because KK Downing was undeniably one of the founders of our favorite genre. And thus I feel like KK's Priest's mission is not to experiment and bring something new to heavy metal, but rather quite the opposite, to showcase the legacy of traditional heavy metal. And this is exactly what KK's Priest fans are coming here for. And so here's the thing, if the classic heavy metal and new wave of British heavy metal cliches are something that you absolutely hate, well, most likely this album, just like their previous record, is not for you. Yet at the same time, if you did enjoy Sermons of the Sinner, I have absolutely zero doubt that you will simply love Sinner Rides Again, because in my opinion, it is a much stronger, perfected version of it, on which KK's Priest, in addition to this classic heavy metal sound, were actually already able to develop bits of what might become their trademark sound, unique to them only. Anyways, what do you guys personally think about KK's Priest in general and about the new songs which were already released? And if you're watching this video after the album was released, please let us know what you think about Sinner Rides Again. I'm really curious to find out. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!